Buonvenito. Hello. Alright, so today's video is going to be a review of the outcomes of a Labour and Liberal government, or governments. And then I'll be ending it with a little thing about what the Greens want to do, seeing as the Greens haven't really been in power. What about interrupting my internet? Come on. Come on. Thank you, Bubbles. Thank you very much. Yeah, so this is going to be a kind of a comprehensive overview of the past few decades. We're going to be going over what Labour has achieved. We're going to be going over things that the Liberals have achieved, for better or for worse, and then finalizing that with some of the Greens policies, because the Greens are in the mix of it all. Yeah, they're in there. What I will say is I think this is going to be a part 1 for this, because there are a lot of other policies that we definitely need to go through, such as, like, let me get it up. So the second video is going to be about energy, renewables, coal, wind. We're going to be talking about supermarket chains, punishment, you know, what have the governments done in terms of that, because we all know by now that price gouging has been a big problem, especially for us Australians struggling with the cost of living. And of course energy also goes into, like, electricity bills. We all know that electricity has been crazy, and considering how wealthy of a country Australia should be, we shouldn't be struggling with that kind of stuff. And there'll be a few other topics in the second video that we'll go over. Just those topics are very big. There's a lot to them, so we're not going to go over them today. I hope that's okay. So yeah, I guess, like, let's get right into it. So we do have a general overview of, like, what has Labour done. And I guess in summarization, they've given us a fee-free TAFE. You might have noticed recently you received mail in your letterbox or some shit, in like, hey, fee-free TAFE, go back to TAFE or some shit. I don't know. I never went to TAFE, so I don't really understand. But they've introduced fee-free TAFE, which is a plus for education and such, right? Labour has given us cheaper childcare. They've made PBS medicines cheaper. Medicine's going to be a big one in this video. We're going to be talking about the housing crisis. We're going to be talking about medicine. We're going to be talking more about penalty rates. We're going to be talking about wage growth and unionization. I might go more into unionization in the next video. I'm not sure. We'll see how it goes. We're going to be talking about migration as well. There's a lot. There's a lot to go through, guys. There's a lot. So what else has Labour done? Well, Labour has given us wage increases for every year they've been in government. Contrast the Liberals. We'll talk more about that later. Labour's inflation reduction program is working, and I'll also point onto that. We'll talk more about it later. Cheaper childcare actually does work towards helping inflation. Yes, we'll see that later on. Labour has also gone against supermarket chains with heavy fines, which the coalition actually opposed. Beyond the scope of this video, but that's something that's happened. Labour has given tax cuts to the middle class and working class, and the coalition would have been given those to Gina Reinhardt and mining corporations more exclusively. So, yeah, it's kind of something. And Labour added more worker safety legislation to protect against being killed on site. Very important. It's important that we feel safe when we go to work, right? Love that. Anyway, we're going to get started on talking about the housing crisis. And you cannot talk about the housing crisis without talking about John Howard, as I have discovered through my research. Let me just put it to you straight. I was born in the late 90s, so my memory of John Howard is, I was too young to be thinking about that shit. But John Howard actually said recently that, and I quote, "There is no housing crisis." And then he said in an interview in 2003, John Howard said, "I haven't found anybody in 7.5 years shake their fist at me and say, 'Howard, I'm angry with you for letting the value of my house increase.'" Oh my god. I love that depiction of what was happening in 2003 and during his government. Oh my god, because we're gonna get into it. Between 2001 and 2022, house prices grew more than 400%, more than twice the pace of wages. And a report out from Oxford Economics predicted that the national average house price would be more than 1.3 million by 2027. And back then in the early 2000s, less than 20% of households were in the private rental market. Now it's close to a third. In 2002, the average retirement age was 55, and only 4% of homeowners aged over 65 carried mortgage debt. However, by 2020, the average retirement age was 64, and more than 50% of homeowners aged 55 to 64 still had mortgage debt. So basically, as you are less able to pay off the high mortgages, the retirement age is going to increase because you need to work to support your living. Older people can't afford to retire, and younger people can't afford to leave their parents' home. Yeah, so the cost of housing has been blamed for couples putting off having children and having fewer of them. So I don't really understand that argument. So, okay. The Australian government at one point believed that relying on private sectors for building was the way to go, and as we can see in the current year, that was a terrible mistake. We have so many building companies that are collapsing. They're making shoddy, crappy builds that are new and completely non-compliant and unsafe. We see, like, from those YouTubers, there's this one guy who's always talking about non-compliance. And I think he's actually been uncovering a pretty crazy scheme where building companies will do shoddy builds, and then they'll just create a new building company to avoid the negatives about the previous one. That's maybe something we should talk about in the next video and do some more investigation of. But all in all, the building scene in Australia is pretty bad. It's pretty bad, and there is no doubt a skilled labour shortage. And now, thanks to John Howard's Liberal government, he actually introduced tax policies that screwed us even further. So a lot of where we're sitting at right now is a result of things that John Howard did. So, but let's get into it. So what are these things that screwed us? Well, negative gearing being one of them. Now this might be a bit of a doozy to wrap your head around. It took me a while, but let me explain. So negative gearing was originally abolished in 1985 by Bob Hawke and Paul Keating, and then a couple years later in 87 it was reinstated due to a sharp rise of rent in Perth and Sydney. However, economists say that during this time that was actually an issue of supply and demand, which is a problem that we are still having in Australia, supply and demand of housing, and it is a really big factor into why things are the way that they are. But for a matter of fact though, in places like Adelaide and Brisbane, rent prices had actually been falling due to the abolishment of negative gearing. And the abolishment actually had no effects on anywhere else in the country. I think that they just felt the pressure of, sharp rise in Perth and Sydney, bring it back. Which I don't think looked good on their government, but anyway. As we know, the Keating government was a Labour one, so they'd been faced by a campaign by John Howard calling them thoroughly dishonest, and I guess people were upset about some of the stuff that happened. I don't know too much more about the government. I can investigate it some more, but that's what I know in terms of negative gearing. I guess because of that and maybe some other things, John Howard would come to win the next election in 1996, and then his government would reign for 11 years. He was in power for 11 years. That is crazy. So once negative gearing was reinstated, it allowed property or rental property owners to claim a tax deduction against their other income if they receive less in rent than they pay out in interest and other associated costs. So an example of how this benefits higher income people is that since tax is progressive, you know, the higher your income, the higher the tax rate, the earnings, so if you're earning less of a rental income, that allows those people to reduce their main taxable income. So that could actually sometimes push them down to a lower tax bracket. And then the main advantage there is that their main income is able to be reduced in taxation because of that rental property working at like technically a loss. So you earn $150,000 a year, you buy a rental property and you lose out on like $10,000 a year, for instance, you still come out on top because you can deduct that from your taxable income. And then you own a property which will appreciate in value, and as we see it, as John Howard said, it makes your housing investments appreciate in a lot of value. So if you're already wealthy, then that's great for you. Thank you, John Howard. Yeah, and this is only amplified because John Howard actually refused to do anything about the tax break for property investors, as he believed that would cause rent to soar, which is still a point made in our current day. And then in 1999, the Howard government halved the rate of capital gains tax payable when properties were sold. So, for example, if you're an investor, you bought a property for $400,000, and then you later on sold it for $500,000, you would get a profit of $100,000. However, that used to be taxed. And John Howard went, we're going to halve that, so now you only pay $50K in tax rather than whatever it was before, right? So this was also done at the marginal rate of tax, which meant those in higher tax brackets could also receive a bigger benefit. And capital gains tax was branded to us as creating a more dynamic economy with more investment, including building more homes, improving housing affordability, and the theory goes on to further say that the CGT would dramatically increase the number of capital transactions, so then there would actually be no impact on the tax revenue flow to the government. And we were marketed to become a country of stakeholders, entrepreneurs, but instead we became a nation of few landlords owning many properties, compound with the alarming issue of increased housing demand with very little supply. This created a period of essentially a gold rush when it comes to owning property. Boomers jumped at the chance to borrow money to invest in property, and the banks let them, and the changes to CGT and negative gearing created a boom in property ownership. It just financially made sense. There was so much competition to get into the housing market that auctions became higher and higher bidding wars, meaning people had to borrow more and more money to compete too. And that, coupled with the interest rates in the early 2000s, property buyers were growing comfortable borrowing money as they'd never seen interest rates go up. They'd always seen them very low. And then there was the global financial crisis that entered the game, and that changed a lot of stuff. So now we have a full generation of older people that are afraid that their investments will lose value if they vote in a Labour government. But as the richer generation grows older and dies off, the amount of voters who are affected by the housing crisis is growing substantially between 1981 and 2021. Ownership rates among the 25 to 34-year-olds fell more than 60 to 40% between that period. During the Hawke government, only 6% of taxpayers were landlords, and then by 2010 it jumped to 19%. It is now about 20%. In the 1990s, it took about 7 years on average to save enough money for a deposit, and then it became 12 years. It just got worse. Because investors preferred to buy houses that had already been built, they could immediately start seeing returns on their investments and owned multiple properties, so new houses aren't really getting built because no one is rich enough to build. There is a big issue between borrowing power and wages. It's really big. Peter Dutton, however, knows all about property and business. He joined his father's business of buying rundown buildings and converting them into childcare facilities. He bought his first property at 19, and his second wife now owns 6 properties, including a Townsville shopping centre. Dutton now alleges that his wife is the one who is in charge of the childcare stuff, and is a trust that merely she benefits from and not him. Seeing as those childcare centres are publicly funded, that would be extremely bad and against the Constitution of Australia if he was benefiting from those. The fact that Mr. Dutton's family are deep in the childcare sector brings a suspicion of conflict of interest, and any political ruling about providing amnesty to childcare would undoubtedly benefit him and his family business, in my opinion, but I also wonder, is that not a conflict of interest or potential abuse of power? Maybe at one point it was. Migration. Migration is a difficult topic to talk about, but it needs to be addressed. We've always had a high intake of migrants, but the rates of migration have increased and decreased as during certain periods, post-war periods, yada yada. In the 1990s, immigration intake waned, but then during the Howard government to the mid-2000s, it shot up dramatically, and since then it has stayed high. So obviously as the population grows, the demand for housing grows with it. Now, unfortunately, a lot of the migrants we do get don't actually work in construction. Then during COVID, property prices still skyrocketed, despite many people leaving the country, more so than we took on. Post-COVID, we had a boom in house renovation, which ultimately diverted our already limited labour force from building new dwellings. Builders might actually prefer to take on these jobs because they usually don't require all the permits and paperwork of building a new house, and then combining that with the increase of supply chain issues, global conflicts, building materials become scarcer, and then around 1/4 to 1/3 of tradespeople work goes towards renovating instead of building. And interestingly, while the Liberals often tout wanting to stop the votes, in John Howard's 11-year ministry, he actually doubled the permanent intake of migrants. At first he did lower the growth of immigration, and so he is sometimes linked towards a lowered migration take. However, this is false. During the latter years of his government, he doubled migration acceptance, and therefore nullified his previous years of low immigration. Yeah, so by the 2007 election, Howard's government had doubled the permanent intake of migrants. Yeah. Peter Dutton, as you might know, he was our immigration minister previously during the Turnbull government. He said that, and I quote, that immigrants were illiterate and uneducated, especially in English, but somehow they were going to take our jobs. That I still don't understand the logic of. Most people, oh my god. How are you going to be literally illiterate, apparently, and uneducated and take out jobs? That doesn't make sense to me whatsoever. It's also, like, incredibly fucking racist, too. Incredibly racist. So, Dutton then said at one point that he wanted to give special treatment to South African farmers and providing visas in emergency, to which his own colleagues rejected the very notion. It was quite a hot topic, actually. And now, further confusion and suspicion for me arises when Peter Dutton can't answer simple questions in regards to net migration numbers. Even the Liberals' website about their plans and policies, they conveniently never mention net migration. Net migration refers to how many people are coming into Australia and leaving. Permanent migration is something Dutton continues to drone on about, saying he'll drastically reduce the permanent migration numbers, but doesn't give us exact numbers and avoids all questions about net migration. So here's what I'm trying to say, is that you can cut the permanent migration program and the humanitarian program, but it'll only make a very minor reduction in net migration, because most of the permanent migration program is sourced from temporary migrants. Those are people who have already been counted in net migration. So migrants can still come at the same rate they are now, and most permanent visa migrants were already temporary to begin with. So that doesn't change the amount of people who are going to be in competition with renting, in competition with jobs. And that's why it's so important that he doesn't talk about that. He doesn't specify. Dutton does go on further to clarify, and I quote, "What we've said is that we want our migration program to step down in the first 2 years. It will ramp up again in years 3 and 4, and we will bring down the numbers who come through the humanitarian refugee program back to the long-run average of that." Doesn't sound that much different to John Howard's fucking immigration plan. And it's also very vague and non-specific, which I don't trust that. I don't trust that at all. It makes no sense. It makes no sense, and the fact that his attempt at clarifying to us doesn't involve net migration at all. What's he trying to avoid saying? The fact that he doesn't actually have a plan to change it? The coalition has even broken the law with visa activity. The coalition broke the law by capping partner visas, which allow Australians to bring over their spouses and partners from other countries. The Australian Migration Act requires spouse visas to be managed on a demand-driven basis. The coalition created a backlog of over 80,000 visas, and has no doubt been a terrible waste of the visa system, wasting their time, wasting the resources of Home Affairs staff, and no doubt our taxes. And I also think that the fact that, whether you agree with it or not, the fact that Peter Dutton went above the law to serve his own political ideologies and agenda is a worrying notion. That does not signal to me a politician of decent, honest character, and you can say that every politician's not decent or dishonest, but I'm telling you right now that this is a illegal act that was done. So, are you still gonna vote for someone who does illegal stuff like that? Makes you wonder what else they'd be willing to go down that route for. Then we have the Peter Dutton au pair scandal. Peter Dutton also allegedly abuses powers as migration minister to give special treatment to rich people who donated to his Liberal Party. A whistleblower and Freedom of Information request released information to the media detailing how Peter Dutton overrode the Australian Border Force when they wanted to deport Alexandra Duell. Alexandra was coming to Australia to be an au pair for South Australian pastoralists Callum and Skye McLaughlin. Callum McLaughlin's father is a big donor to the Liberal Party. Alexandra had been warned prior for working as an au pair to the family in 2015. Her working was breaking her visa conditions. She had a tourist visa, I can assume. Dutton went ahead and granted her another tourist visa, obviously with the stipulation that she wouldn't work while she was there. Do you believe that she honoured that? She came to Australia to work as an au pair, which is basically a live-in maid. And the McLaughlins were like, no, it's a misunderstanding. We actually think of her as family. I'm sure there's many Australians with loved ones who visit that they would love if they could stay longer, but I guess having direct access to the Minister of Migration is a plus if you can afford it. And historically speaking, Dutton performing such a ministerial intervention for an emergency visa is quite rare. And for example, the Migration Department under Dutton's rule denied medical transfers of numerous asylum seekers, including children at risk of death. Even an Afghan interpreter who helped Australian soldiers could not be granted a visa to save him from danger. he couldn't get anything from Peter Dutton. While Peter Dutton's decision on the au pair was legal, migration ministers get a certain level of power that the Senate can't actually argue with. He was only required to give a statement about why he granted the visa to not one but two au pairs. Suddenly, he's personally helping these two about to be deported for allegedly violating their visa, and they just so happen to work for a family that donates a lot of money to his political party? But he can't help children who are dying in detention centers? Okay. Yeah. And you also, when the minister provides a visa like that, it has to be in the public's best interest. They have to provide a reason that aligns with the best interest of the Australian public. And his reasoning was like, oh, we're a kind country, so we should be kind to people when they're struggling. Except when they're, ethnic children in a detention center who are fucking dying. Okay. So I think that, furthermore, the coalition's illegal decision to cause a backlog of partner visas has put the current Labor government in a tricky situation. The backlog is so severe, and although Labor have cut through, I think, at least half of those backlog visas, they're still faced with a decision to make. They can keep illegally slowing partner visas and thus continuing a backlog to grow, or they can shift visa spots away from parent visas and skill stream and put it towards the partner visa, which number two is no doubt going to be the only option Labor can go with, as it's the only lawful one, and it will be ultimately attacked because the focus of migration with not as much value for skilled workers is, yeah, it's not great, right? We would love more skilled workers, but the law is the law, right? Reducing parent visas is also just not a good look. But don't forget, this is a situation that Peter Dutton created. And alternatively, the parties could agree to change the law and put a cap on partner visas. So that could happen. So what is the solution to housing? Well, the coalition's current idea is to allow would-be home buyers to dip into their superannuation retirement fund, which would not only continue to push up home prices, but it would drain the future retirement incomes of young home buyers. Dipping into your superannuation is a serious decision to make, and the risk comes with many possibilities. Like, what happens if you get injured and you cannot work anymore? Unfortunately, changing the tax laws and CGT now would require a lot of reform beyond the scope of a few years. It might have some impact, but nothing substantial, according to some economists. The real solution that I agree with is increasing the supply of dwellings, which is, albeit a crude simplification to a complex problem. Demand has been growing more than supply. However, there are some major choke points when it comes to increasing the supply of housing. We've got planning, we've got zoning laws, we've got regulations that can hinder development, especially around city centres. So this then encourages urbanisation to sprawl out further from like the city centre. And then that's going to increase infrastructure costs, right? We do have some proof from Auckland that density in city centres can result in lower rent prices. A sprawling urban city isn't so bad as long as you have the transport and high-speed rail to back it up. Other people do suggest cutting migration at least until we can get housing stock back up. All the solutions we have do come at a cost, but standing idly by will cost us the most, obviously. We can expect any of these solutions to take at least a decade for fruition. And I do think limitations on CGT and negative gearing should be looked into and implemented. Scott Morrison famously said that he didn't like the way negative gearing worked, but he did nothing about it. The Coalition and Labor say they will ban foreign investment and purchasing of Australian land and property. However, foreign home purchases accounted for less than 1% of all sales, given the small proportion of foreign ownership. The idea sounds good on the face of it, but will do little to change the housing economy. We have Labour's housing solution, which is, as I said, banning foreign investment for 2 years. It's like, okay. They want to boost the supply of homes by mainly providing payments to states and territories. They want to boost investments in social housing and affordable housing. The Liberals' housing solution is, again, foreign buy ban 2 years, accessing superannuation retirement fund to get a house, and then funding infrastructure such as sewers and roads to enable new housing in urban fringes. Again, like I said, it can be done, but it requires so much more than just building sewers and water systems further out. It requires public transport, the roads. The commute is going to be so much longer. It's going to be opening a whole other can of worms. And again, accessing your superannuation, even if there's a limit to like 50k, the problem with buying a house is the amount that you have to take out as a loan, and then the wages that most people are getting. These two things are, it just doesn't work. At that rate, you're going to be spending your whole life paying off a mortgage. That's a big problem. But I guess you won't need to worry about your superannuation because you won't be retiring anyway. Yep. Just because you can get a house doesn't mean that changes the mortgage. Okay. Small businesses. The reason small businesses are suffering because of rising cost of living, post-COVID supply chain issues. It's a really big problem. As demand increases, supply lowers to staggering amounts, price increases. I remember when I got my hair dyed, the hairdresser was talking about how because the supplies that she has to pay for, the consumables and stuff, has gone up so much in price that they have to increase the prices of their services to cover it, to even make any money from it. Pretty sure during COVID, the price of cotton went up by like 400%. Then we got rent and interest rates skyrocketing. We have insurance going up, and we have energy prices. Again, I won't be going too much into energy prices this video, but it's a wide variety of rising costs that are putting a strain on small businesses. I think rent skyrocketing is an outcome that has resulted from the Howard government, and I think the coalition promised small businesses to be able to write or like tax write off work lunches, but then they haven't really, as of right now, released any details for that plan. And also, how the fuck is like cheaper like work lunches, like, is that even a thing that small businesses are even worried about? Work lunches? Don't most people provide their own lunch? Okay. Kind of sounds like the kind of thing that the caviar eaters would benefit from the most. Oh, such a hard day at the coal mines, managing all these coal workers. Let's go have a work lunch at Nobu. And we can write it off on tax. Yeah, so the coalition mainly is promising to cut penalty rates in an attempt to support small businesses. So, penalty rates. What is the issue? Well, penalty rates essentially mean employers have to pay more to their employees when they work weekends and public holidays. Sundays and public holidays being the more expensive days for the employer to pay. The theory is that by foregoing these extra costs, it will allow small businesses to hire more staff, open the stores on Sunday with an appropriate amount of staff, and more hospitality, especially being able to be open on Sunday. Some of the times they say like, oh, it also means like the service will be better because there'll be more staff to be able to wait people. Okay. Then supposedly the increased opening hours should allow businesses to rake in more money, and then prices may also come down due to businesses better affording operations on Sunday and potentially making more of a profit. There is, however, no guarantee that this will result in hiring more staff, and it will also directly take money away from working people who are already most likely living week-to-week paychecks. Workers also deserve fair compensation for losing their weekends and public holidays, times when they get to spend with family, friends, socializing, relaxation, using weekends to play in sports and leading normal social and healthy lives that helps support the mental health and overall healthiness of the population. So it is a very important sacrifice that one has to make when they work a weekend or public holiday. So by cutting penalty rates and reducing paychecks to the workers, I think they say that in penalty rates will be taken away, and then in return you get like a 25%, 15% increase in wage. Still, by cutting penalty rates and reducing paycheck of the workers, it will very likely mean less money is getting put into the economy as they have to adjust their budget. Wage cuts reduce the income of workers and thus spending lowers. Casual employees will also have less time to spend with their children, reducing the much needed family bonding time. And millions of Australians will suffer from these changes and lose up to $6,000 a year. So even if businesses decide to run on Sundays to increase the chance of patronage in an already struggling economy where people aren't spending to go out for a $35 hipster burger, what makes you think they're suddenly going to start piling to shops now? Because let me clue you in, people aren't coming in because it's not because businesses aren't open Sunday. And under Scott Morrison's government, wage growths were quite minimal. While certain sectors had penalty rates slashed, Morrison's government, his response was that he is not opposed to workers getting a pay rise, but that he doesn't believe that it's the government's role to be involved in enforcing pay increases either. So, okay, well, what is the government's role then? Is pay increases supposed to be purely up to just the employer? Okay. Then I determine you get one pay increase every 80 years. If you're alive in 80 years, we'll talk. Awesome. So the coalition states that by raising wages, employment will drop, but there is no evidence to prove that is the case, and there is no guarantee that penalty rates will increase in hiring. There's just no way of ensuring that will even happen. So then we're going to continue talking about childcare. Dutton's childcare. Peter Dutton knows all about business, like I said. I'm sure he hears a lot about it with his wife's childcare centres in Brisbane. Those very centres that were owned by his father's trust earned $2.03 million in Commonwealth funding between 2014 and 2018. So he did give up his interest in the trust before the May 2018 election. And in October of 2018, protesters told the media that they were earning just $22 an hour and were wondering if Dutton would help support the wages of early educators, as his family seemed so invested in them. And in addition, regulation changes to the childcare sector saw staff working triple overnight with no matching pay rise. People are not happy about that. So childcare, who does it better? Well, like I said, Labor has cut costs of early childhood education care by $2,700 for the average family. They also implemented a 15% pay rise for educators and promised $1 billion fund to build 160 childcare centres in areas that are lacking. The Liberals' plan is to cut costs by making the teacher-to-student ratio 1 teacher per 50 students. One teacher has to deal with 50 children? Oh my god. I remember when I was in school struggling with classrooms full of like 25 people. They want to double that? That's insane. I mean, most parents can hardly handle their, what, 1, 2, or 3 children. Imagine having 50. Holy bejesus. So the reason why Labour would target childcare in their policies and their actions is because it actually has a huge social and economic benefit to our society. Education outcomes for children are improved, and because of low cost / free education of children, we can actually help bring parents back into the workforce. Some credit should be given though. During COVID 2020, the Morrison government did make childcare free very briefly, and that actually reduced inflation by 1% just for that quarter. So, childcare, it does help. So wage growth and unionization. This is another contentious topic. They're all quite contentious, aren't they? Last time the coalition was in power, wages didn't grow for 10 years. And essentially due to loopholes in wage cutting, the rightful increase in wages that workers deserved were actually going to the big businesses instead. You know, you ever heard about how wages stagnate, but then somehow the CEO gets a bonus of like a few billy or a few milli a year? Where does that come from? Oh. So then when inflation hit really badly, it was used as an excuse for price gouging. Price gouging. It's no wonder why the big business profits and CEOs' salaries are sky high while the rest of us are struggling to pay for $140 groceries. The lowest paid workers in Australia are limited to a 2% pay rise, while top bosses originally garnered an increase above the average earnings by 17 times in the 90s. It is now increased by 55 times the average wage. Wow. Historically, our wages and productivity grew together. Then this stopped during the last coalition government, and if this didn't happen, workers would be at least $10,000 richer and better off. Dude. $10,000? Imagine what you could do with that. So criminalizing wage theft is also a huge thing when it comes to workers' rights and income. Australian workers are losing up to $1.35 billion a year due to wage theft. Previously, this was only a criminal offence in some states, but now it's an offence at the Commonwealth level. Penalties to employers have also increased up to 5 times as well as the possibility of prison. So hopefully disincentivizing it a lot more. Instead of it being like, you get a fine. You get a fine for like 10k or something. No, they're probably going to go to prison if they keep doing that shit. Superannuation theft has also been included there, so that'll go nicely to your housing fund, won't it? Peter Dutton and the coalition have voted against these new criminalization wage rights, and for me, just my opinion, if they're going to say that they want to support the everyday Australian, their vote certainly doesn't indicate that to me. There is no reason to not vote yes to criminalizing wage theft. Unless you think Australian workers don't deserve to retire or earn their decent living. You know, what you work for, you deserve to get paid for. Right? Furthermore, regional workers are suffering because of a monopsony. This is a concept that works similarly to monopolies. A monopsony refers to a single buyer of a good. So, for example, if you're the only employer in a town purchasing labour, you decide the wages you will provide as there's no competition. Workers have no bargaining power, and if you are regional or rural, you might be shit out of luck job-wise. Yeah. When workers move from regional areas to the city, their annual income can rise by 8%. And it's not since 1901 has Australia had such a low unionisation rate as it is today. Because of declining union memberships, the market power is shifting to balance towards employers, and workers' rights are diminishing. So when Peter Dutton claims that unions are costing us millions despite record low unionisation, How is that even possible? Just, what's happening there? So, the opposite of what we want is happening right now. Employers are massively united together and campaigning to remove unions and penalty rates. Workers have never been as fragmented as they are today. And in the past 120 years, we are facing a terribly vulnerable workforce suffering at the hands of corporations. So we have to check those monopsony powers, especially as less competition is able to survive the rising cost of living and rental prices. And I just want to remind you that unions are directly responsible for most of the benefits you enjoy today, even as a non-union member. Paid vacation, sick leave, 40-hour work weeks, overtime pay, work health and safety, better wages, and a middle class that even exists. A decline in unions means a decline in the middle class. And while I recognize that unions can become corrupt and can sometimes protect unsafe or bad employees, there are just a few bad apples, and it's not in the nature of unions. Unions at their heart have been a net benefit for us. So, medicine. At the beginning of 2023, the Labour government reduced the co-payment. The maximum amount a patient would have to pay for prescribed medicine on the PBS scheme fell from $42.50 to $30. PBS bubbles. So, over the last few decades, the indexation of medical benefits scheme was largely frozen. This scheme sets out how much doctors are paid by the government to provide services for patients, which is what forced many doctors to stop bulk billing and closing clinics. To quote, MBS indexation has not kept pace with the increasing costs of running medical practices. Issues with the MBS indexation has been spurring since the 90s. And the coalition's government's initial decision to not index the MBS for 4 years from 1st of July 2014 until 1st of July 2018 was extended by 2 more years to 2020 in the 2016-17 budget, further increasing the gap between patients' Medicare rebates and medical fees. So, a summarization of bulk billing under John Howard's Liberal government shows us the lies and deceivery they're willing to go to. John Howard even said in the 80s, campaigning that Medicare was a rort and a miserable system that raped the poor. Then between 87 and 95, I guess he realized that Australians actually kind of care a lot about their health and access to that. So he started talking about how the Liberal Party was unanimous in agreeing that, oh, universal bulk billing, it's here to stay. We gotta keep it, you know? Then we saw out-of-pocket expenses rise by nearly 55% over the life of the Howard government. That's from an article in 2003. And then an article in 2010 said, pathology and diagnostic imaging services had not been indexed at all since 1998. So looking at the history of the Liberal Party, hold on. The Liberal Party has consistently voted against Medicare and dismantled it as much as possible whenever they gained power. And then MBS indexation has increased over the years slightly, but it hasn't kept up with inflation and the CPI. These days, bulk billing is more applicable to children and pensioners, which causes young and middle-aged adults to miss out on seeing the doctor more. And when people don't get their medical needs met, they end up in the hospital for emergencies. And so the point here is that prevention is key, and we should be focusing on allowing Australians to see their GP worry-free. When Australians' key workforce is not healthy, we're in trouble. When our hospitals are backed up and full of cases that could have been prevented, we're in a crisis. That's just how that is. Okay, we're going to touch on energy very momentarily. Energy relief. Due to a combination of state and federal and territory relief subsidies, low-income households didn't face as high an increase on their electricity bill, And in September 2023, electricity prices did increase by 4.1%, but could have skyrocketed 18.6% if it weren't for the energy relief bill. Yeah, I know. I don't know if it was a bill, but you know what I'm saying. So the cost of installing solar panels on every residential rooftop would be $9.8 billion per year for 5 years. It would actually be paying for itself in 5.3 years. And then the problem with coal and gas is they are also exposed to international markets, meaning that global price will shock these commodities and have a knock-on effect for our local electricity. And as you might know, I mean, we've been having quite a few outages. I never in my life have I experienced so many outages. Where, I mean, oh my god. It's been getting pretty bad. This summer, surprisingly, we didn't have any problems, but the problem with a very short summer, the problem with like coal and stuff is that all the coal generators are very old. They're very old, and with age can come some degradation, of course. I think there's still a few coal generators that are still operating from the 70s. So we have some problems with instability with coal, and that instability can drive up prices. And as the global weather changes and becomes crazier, you know, in summer more and more people are turning on their air conditioners when they have them. Yeah, and look, am I going to say that solar is the be-all end-all for every single residential rooftop? No, but we will get to that topic in the next video. We will. So the next thing to go on about is the Greens policies. Now, again, I'll say that this is all the stuff the Greens say they want to do. And some people will criticize the Greens and say like they're very idealistic. But basically, the Greens want to add ADHD and autism assessments to Medicare, which would save thousands of out-of-pocket costs, because at the moment, if you want to get any of that stuff figured out, not only is the wait list like massive, but the cost of it is so much. And you know, it would help so many people if they could figure out these things, right? I think people deserve to know what's going on with them. So the Greens also want to wipe all student debt, and they're going to make price gouging corporations pay for that. Most of the Greens' plan is we're going to make mining and stuff get taxed way more, and then we're going to use that money to pay for all of what we're planning. Which is a nice idea, I think. It's a nice idea. You want to go out? So, the Greens' plan would result in a debt of $27,600 being wiped and saving $5,500 a year, and enough to cover more than 6 months worth of groceries. I don't know. I'll probably look into this stuff more in depth in the next video, but that's from the Greens' own website. So, okay. Yeah, actually, I think that would actually probably wipe my debt. I think it'd come really close to wiping my debt, actually. So if we wiped student debt, it would make it easier for people to buy their first home. An average student debt reduces borrowing power of a person on a $120,000 salary by $90,000. I don't know anyone who has a $120,000 salary, but good for you if you do. And then 50-cent public transport is a scheme that's already running successfully in Queensland, and the Greens want to bring that all over Australia. In Sydney, a worker can expect to save $2,160 a year. In Perth, $2,006, Adelaide, $1,872 a year, and Melbourne, households could save almost $5,000 a year. So we definitely have some of the most costly public transport in the world, with tons of price hikes in the last 18 months, I think. Oh my god, it's crazy. And Queensland has successfully reduced traffic and emissions and massively increased ridership on public transport and saved Queenslanders millions. So I think I like that. I think that's good. Again, they're going to pay for this by taxing big corporations. And that is something that I wholeheartedly agree with. Now, the Greens do take credit for this Queensland fair thing, and Labor is also saying they come up with the scheme, so, I mean, honestly, the Greens and Labor have a really long and complicated history that I could go over in another video, but at the moment, there's a lot of contention between who got it started. Historically, though, I think the two parties have deeply similar goals. There's just a lot of drama around the both of them, especially the Greens. There's drama around the Greens blocking some housing bill stuff that Labor wanted to do, and then the Greens were like, we want you to know that we'll walk away from a bad deal. Even if it's like what we want, if it's not good enough, we'll walk away from it. I don't really know. I think it's good to have the Greens to push Labor to do more, because sometimes it can feel like Labor's more like center of the political spectrum. I would like to see them more left of things, but you know, my opinion better than the alternative, right? So in regards to the housing crisis, the Greens want to cap rent increases, rent freeze, long-term rent caps. They want to regulate banks and deliver fairer and lower mortgages. It's kind of vague, but they quote that the 4 big banks made $44.6 billion in profit last year. It's a lot. Dude, I hate the Commonwealth Bank. I hate ANZ too. What else is there? Yeah, dude, those two banks piss me off. Especially Commonwealth Bank. There was a time where they had a glitch in the system where people got doubly transacted against or something. Like, people would buy groceries and then that transaction would come through twice. So if you paid for like $200 groceries or some shit, it would bill you twice. That was a problem that happened with the Commonwealth Bank. Those people are scum, I say. They're scum, I tell you. Oh. Don't even get me started on ANZ as well. They're all fucking annoying. The Greens also want to scrap tax handouts given to property investors with more than 2 properties, scrapping negative gearing. They want to build public and affordable homes, and they want to introduce a government-owned developer to build quality homes sold and rented at affordable prices. And they want to establish a national renters protection authority to help enforce renter rights. So that's kind of what the Greens want to do there, and yeah. So that's kind of what it is. That's the 3 big parties. I reckon my next video I'll go more into all that stuff when it comes to energy, renewables, coal, wind. That's pretty big. Oh, actually, let me put in nuclear, because nuclear is a big one. So we'll do some research on that, talk about that. We'll talk about supermarket chains and punishment, the supermarket duopoly. Yeah, and we'll talk about the Green Party in a little bit more detail, maybe, or we'll talk about Greens and Labour. I don't know. But yeah, that's essentially it. So yeah, I tried to avoid going too hard on the They Vote For You website, because it, after reading the comments, it was like, yeah, you know, using it as a main source for everything didn't feel like it was the right amount of research to do. So I hope you liked this, going a little bit more in depth with like historical outcomes and stuff like that. Obviously it's not like a hugely big overview of like the last, like, I don't know, 100 years. But I think we did a pretty good job on that. And look, you can decide what you want to do with that information. I was certainly surprised by a lot of what I learned looking at it all. Yeah, I was really surprised actually. I feel like didn't really know much about Peter Dutton until I did all this research, and there's a lot of articles that I read through from many different sources, many different independent newspapers. Ugh, my god. And yeah, I mean, I guess you could say that like maybe Labor's not doing enough. And look, if you feel like Labor's not doing enough, you could go with the Greens party. You know what I learned? I learned that apparently the preferential voting system isn't actually mandatory in every state. That shocked the hell out of me. I actually think our voting system's alright, you know? Anyway, so guys, with that being said, this was a rare Friday episode. I hope you enjoy. I hope you enjoyed that very political episode. And gosh, maybe next week. Wait, no, we can't do Monday because it's Friday. I'm thinking it's Monday already. What the hell's wrong with me? So next episode, I don't know if it'll be continue of this. The next episode might be like a little break episode where we talk about other news that's more like surface level. But I will be working on this, so don't you fret. We gotta get this information out there. Alright guys, have a wonderful weekend. Enjoy your Friday. Happy Friday. Yay. Go outside, have some fun. I think it's going to be a pleasant weekend, right? Let's have a look. It's gonna be a pleasant weekend, 24, 21. We are in... Oh my god, are we not in autumn or something now? Technically not yet. Technically not yet. Right guys, have a wonderful weekend and I bid you adieu. And let me throw out a Philly D thing here. What do you think has been the outcome of our governments? What do you think? Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you. Alright, bye.